The July sun beat down mercilessly on Westlake Gardens, an upscale suburban neighborhood where property lines were sacred and HOA regulations were treated like biblical commandments. Thomas Bennett wiped sweat from his brow as he eased himself into the cool water of his newly installed swimming pool, the culmination of 6 months of planning, permits, and construction. At 45, Thomas had worked his entire adult life for moments like this, peaceful Sunday afternoons in his own backyard oasis. His tranquility lasted precisely 7 minutes. "Excuse me," the voice sliced through the air with the precision of a surgeon's scalpel. "Excuse me, but you need to get out of there right now." Thomas' eyes fluttered open to see a woman standing at the edge of his pool, arms crossed tightly across her chest. She wore tennis whites and a scowl that suggested she'd been practicing this confrontation in front of her mirror. He recognized her immediately as Caroline Winters, the self-appointed neighborhood watchdog who lived 3 doors down. "I'm sorry." Thomas treaded water, blinking away droplets that clung to his eyelashes. "This pool," Caroline said, pointing dramatically at the water surrounding him, "is in direct violation of the neighborhood covenant. Section 7, paragraph 3 clearly states that all water features must be approved by the architectural committee, which they were not." Thomas slowly made his way to the pool steps, emerging with as much dignity as a middle-aged man in swim trunks could muster. "Actually, Caroline, I have all the approvals right here." He gestured toward a folder on the patio table. "City permits, HOA architectural committee sign-off, everything by the book." Caroline's jaw tightened. "That's impossible. I'm the head of the architectural committee." "The interim head," Thomas corrected gently, "after Richard stepped down last month, but he signed off on this before he left. Would you like to see the paperwork?" Her nostrils flared slightly. "This is my neighborhood, and I know what belongs here and what doesn't. This monstrosity certainly doesn't." Thomas felt something shift inside him, a tectonic plate of patience that had been under pressure for too long. 15 years in this neighborhood, he'd watched as Caroline had driven out 3 families with her relentless enforcement of rules that seemed to apply differently depending on who you were. "Caroline," he said quietly, "this is my property. I followed every rule, jumped through every hoop. Now I'd appreciate it if you'd leave so I can enjoy my Sunday." Her face flushed crimson. "I don't think you understand. You need to drain this immediately. I'm giving you 24 hours before I file a formal complaint." Thomas took a deep breath. "I'm not draining anything. And you're trespassing. We'll see about that." She turned sharply, pausing at the gate. "Get out of that pool. It shouldn't be here, and neither should you." As her tennis shoes crunched down his gravel pathway, Thomas stood dripping on his patio, cold realization washing over him. This wasn't just about a pool. This was about power, territory, and a woman who'd never faced consequences for her actions. Little did Caroline know, Thomas Bennett wasn't just an unassuming it manager. He was also a hydrological engineer who had designed water systems for 3 continents, and he knew exactly how the neighborhood's water infrastructure worked. By Monday morning, Caroline Winters would learn a valuable lesson about casting stones from glass houses. It would begin with the simple turn of a valve. Thomas spent the remainder of his Sunday afternoon methodically reviewing the neighborhood's water system blueprints, documents he had helped design 3 years prior during the community's infrastructure upgrade. Few residents knew that Thomas had volunteered his expertise pro bono, saving the HOA thousands in consulting fees. Caroline had taken full credit for the budget surplus at that year's annual meeting. As darkness fell, Thomas made his way to the neighborhood's main water junction box, cleverly disguised as a decorative rock formation near the community entrance. With a specialized key and the confidence of someone who belongs, he opened the access panel and examined the complex network of valves and meters. Each home had individual controls, a feature Thomas had insisted upon during the redesign, ostensibly for emergency shutoffs. By 11 p.m., he had installed a small, unobtrusive remote system that would allow him precise control over Caroline's water supply. Not permanently. Thomas wasn't vindictive, just long enough to make a point. Monday morning arrived with the cheerful brightness that seemed to mock impending confrontation. Thomas called in sick to work for the first time in 5 years, then positioned himself with a cup of coffee on his front porch, tablet in hand. The tablet displayed a simple interface, a digital replica of Caroline's home water system with toggles for each zone. At precisely 7:15 a.m., he watched Caroline's sprinkler system activate, spraying her meticulously manicured lawn with pressurized arcs of water. He gave it 2 minutes, just long enough for her to step into her shower, before tapping the master control on his tablet. 3 doors down, Caroline Winters stood shivering under a suddenly dry showerhead, hair half-lathered with imported Italian shampoo. Confusion gave way to irritation as she wrapped herself in a towel and hurried to check the other faucets. Kitchen sink, dry. Guest bathroom, nothing. Downstairs toilet, silent when flushed. Thomas allowed himself a small smile as he watched her front door burst open 20 minutes later. Caroline emerged, hair hastily rinsed with bottled water, makeup only half applied. She marched directly to the home of Walter Mendez, the Hehoa treasurer and retired plumber. 30 minutes later, as Walter crawled under Caroline's house examining pipes, Thomas restored her water with another tap on his tablet. Walter emerged confused but assured Caroline everything seemed normal now. She didn't appear convinced. Throughout the day, at carefully spaced intervals, never long enough to justify an emergency plumber, just enough to cause inconvenience, Thomas toppled her water supply. During her lunchtime gathering with the garden club, off. 15 minutes later, on. As she prepared dinner for her weekly bridge game, off again. By evening, Caroline had canceled her bridge night and was sitting grimly by her kitchen window, watching her home's water meter as if it might reveal the source of her mysterious affliction. Thomas knew the real test would come tomorrow. Tuesday was Caroline's sacred lawn maintenance day, the day she spent ensuring her yard remained the envy of Westlake Gardens. The day that, not coincidentally, she always found reason to cite others for their landscaping violations. As he prepared for bed, Thomas received a text message from his neighbor Eric, forwarding a neighborhood-wide email from Caroline. Due to potential water pressure issues affecting some homes, I'll be conducting an emergency inspection of all backyard water features tomorrow at 10 a.m. Attendance and compliance are mandatory. Thomas smiled as he set his alarm. Tomorrow would be interesting indeed. The neighborhood gathered on Thomas's pristine back lawn at precisely 10 a.m. Tuesday. Caroline arrived last, clipboard in hand, wearing what could only be described as tactical gardening attire, khaki pants with multiple pockets, a wide-brimmed hat, and rubber boots despite the clear sky and dry forecast. I appreciate everyone's prompt attendance, she announced, scanning the group of homeowners with the intensity of a general inspecting troops. As I mentioned in my email, we're experiencing concerning water pressure irregularities. We need to inspect all non-essential water features immediately. Thomas stood casually beside his pool, sipping coffee from a mug that read, "World's Best Engineer," a gift from his former colleagues in Dubai, where he designed irrigation systems for desert reclamation. The irony wasn't lost on him. Let's start with the most obvious culprit, Caroline declared, marching toward Thomas's pool. This unauthorized installation is likely drawing excessive resources from our community system. It's fully authorized, Caroline, Thomas reminded her calmly, and it uses a recirculation system that consumes less water annually than your front lawn does in a month. Several neighbors suppressed smiles. Caroline's obsession with her emerald green lawn was legendary, especially during drought restrictions when everyone else's yards had turned an acceptable shade of California beige. Technical details aside, Caroline continued as if he hadn't spoken, "We need to test the system. I'll need you to turn off your pump so we can measure baseline neighborhood pressure." Thomas nodded agreeably, happy to help with the investigation. He tapped his phone screen twice and the pool's pump quieted. Caroline smiled triumphantly, mistaking cooperation for submission. The group moved methodically through the neighborhood, checking fountains, irrigation systems, and outdoor showers. At each stop, Caroline documented imaginary violations with increasing frustration as no obvious problem emerged. When they reached Caroline's home, the last on the inspection route, Thomas discreetly tapped his tablet screen. The moment Caroline turned her garden hose toward her prized rose bushes for a demonstration of proper water pressure, nothing happened. The hose remained limp in her hand, not even a drop emerging. "That's strange," she muttered, jiggling the nozzle. "It was working fine earlier." "Water pressure issues can be intermittent," Thomas offered helpfully. "Perhaps we should check your main line." The group followed as Caroline led them to her water meter, which showed zero flow despite the open tap. Her face flushed as she struggled to maintain composure. "This proves my point," she declared. "Something in the neighborhood is causing irregular pressure fluctuations." Thomas stepped forward. "May I?" he asked, gesturing toward her irrigation control panel mounted discreetly behind a hydrangea bush. Caroline hesitated, then nodded stiffly. Thomas examined the panel with professional interest, making a show of checking connections. With his body blocking the view, he pressed a small override button on his smartwatch. Instantly, Caroline's entire sprinkler system erupted to life, all zones simultaneously, shooting water with fire hose intensity across her garden, assembled neighbors, and Caroline herself. Chaos ensued as everyone scrambled to avoid the unexpected deluge. Caroline shrieked, attempting to reach the manual shoot-off while being soaked from multiple directions. By the time Thomas found the emergency cutoff 2 minutes later, Caroline stood in the center of her once immaculate lawn, hair plastered to her face, makeup running in dark rivulets down her cheeks. The silence that followed was broken only by the sound of water dripping from saturated clothing. "It appears," Thomas said quietly, "that the water pressure issue might originate from your system, Caroline. An overridden controller combined with excessive capacity. Essentially, you've been drawing more than your share from the community supply. The gathered neighbors murmured, several nodding as if this explained everything. That's impossible, Caroline sputtered. I've maintained this system perfectly for years. Perhaps it's time for a professional inspection, offered Walter Mendez, water dripping from his baseball cap. We can schedule it for the same day as your architectural compliance review. Caroline's eyes widened as the implications sank in. For the first time since moving to Westlake Gardens, she was on the receiving end of the inspection process she had weaponized against others. Thomas met her gaze evenly. I'd be happy to recommend some excellent contractors, he said softly. They might even be able to help with that unauthorized koi pond you installed last spring. By Wednesday morning, whispers had spread through Westlake Gardens like wildfire. The neighborhood text chain buzzed with speculation about Caroline's water system and rumors of other unreported violations at the Winters residence. Thomas watched the digital drama unfold while preparing for the day's events, what he privately thought of as Act 3 of his carefully orchestrated lesson in consequences. At precisely 7 a.m., as Caroline stepped onto her front porch to retrieve her newspaper, she froze. Her lawn, her pride and joy, her verdant testament to superiority, had transformed overnight. Brown patches spread across the once perfect grass like a disease, forming unmistakable letters visible from the street. Hijawave Efraved. From his kitchen window, Thomas observed her reaction through binoculars. The newspaper slid from her fingers as she stumbled forward, falling to her knees on the discolored grass. She frantically ran her hands over the dead patches as if her touch might resurrect the blades. What Caroline couldn't know, was that Thomas had applied a harmless agricultural dye to her lawn during the night, one that would fade within 3 days. No permanent damage, just temporary humiliation proportional to the embarrassment she'd inflicted on countless neighbors over trivial violations. By 8 a.m., neighbors were walking their dogs with suspicious frequency past Caroline's house, smartphones discreetly capturing images that would inevitably appear on the community Facebook page. By 9 a.m., Walter Mendez had called an emergency AHOA meeting for that evening to address community concerns about leadership integrity. Thomas spent the day working remotely, monitoring the neighborhood activity through security cameras he'd installed after Caroline's previous unannounced inspections of his property. At 2 p.m., he watched as she frantically attempted to conceal the lawn message with garden furniture, potted plants, and finally, in desperation, a collection of tarps that only drew more attention to the affected area. The emergency meeting was scheduled for 7 p.m. at the community clubhouse. At 6:30, Thomas received an unexpected visitor. Caroline stood on his doorstep, her typical composure shattered. Eyes red-rimmed, hair disheveled, she looked nothing like the imperious figure who had ordered him from his own pool 3 days earlier. I know it was you, she said without preamble, voice barely above a whisper. Thomas leaned against his doorframe. Would you like to come in, Caroline? Perhaps have some water? I seem to have plenty of pressure today. She flinched at the reference. Why? Why would you do this to me? Interesting question, Thomas replied, stepping aside to let her enter. I've been wondering the same thing about your behavior toward me, and the Paddles before me, and the Rodriguezes before them. What drives someone to weaponize community rules against their neighbors? Caroline remained on the doorstep, arms wrapped protectively around herself. I'd only ever tried to maintain standards, property values, quality of life. By terrorizing anyone who doesn't conform to your personal aesthetic, by driving out families who brought diversity and culture to our neighborhood, by claiming unilateral authority over approvals that should be democratic. Tears spilled down Caroline's cheeks. The meeting tonight, they're going to remove me from the committee, maybe even the board. My reputation. Your reputation, Thomas interrupted gently, is exactly what you've earned, just as mine was when you told everyone my pool was unauthorized. A long silence stretched between them. What do you want? Caroline finally asked. To destroy me completely. Thomas shook his head. Not destruction. Education. 3 neighbors have left Westlake Gardens in tears because of your campaigns against them. This isn't about revenge, it's about balance. He reached into his pocket and withdrew a small remote control. This controls everything that's happened to your water and your lawn. One button, and it all returns to normal. Caroline's eyes widened. You can fix my lawn before the meeting? I can. But first, I need your signature on 2 documents. Thomas retrieved a folder from his entry table. The first is your resignation from the architectural committee, effective immediately. The second is a proposal for restructuring the committee to require 3 signatures on all violation notices, preventing any single person from wielding too much power. Caroline stared at the papers, then at Thomas. You've been planning this from the beginning. Since the moment you tried to force me out of my own pool, he confirmed. Sometimes the only way to teach boundaries is to demonstrate what happens when they're crossed. With trembling hands, Caroline signed both documents. Thomas pocketed them, then pressed a button on the remote. The Thursday morning sun climbed lazily over Westlake Gardens, illuminating a neighborhood transformed. Caroline's lawn had mysteriously returned to its vibrant emerald state overnight. The accusatory brown lettering faded like a half-forgotten dream. The emergency FOA meeting had concluded with unexpected grace. Caroline had announced her resignation before anyone could call for it, and Thomas' restructuring proposal passed unanimously. Thomas sipped his morning coffee on his back patio, watching the gentle ripples of his pool with satisfaction. The water feature that had triggered this cascade of events now symbolized something beyond personal luxury. It represented a community reclaiming its balance. His phone buzzed with a neighborhood-wide email. Community pool party, Saturday, 2 p.m., all welcome. The sender, Caroline Winters. Thomas read the message twice, certain it was a mistake. Yet the details seemed genuine. Cookout, swimming in a special announcement from the former architectural committee chair. By Saturday afternoon, curiosity had drawn nearly every Westlake Gardens resident to Thomas's street. Neighbors gathered tentatively around Caroline's driveway, where tables laden with catered food stretched along her immaculate lawn, the same lawn that had so recently broadcast her shame to the community. At precisely 2 p.m., Caroline emerged from her home carrying a small wooden box. The crowd hushed as she approached a makeshift podium. "Thank you all for coming," she began, voice steadier than Thomas would have expected. "I owe this community an apology. For years, I've confused order with control and standards with superiority." Murmurs rippled through the gathered neighbors. Thomas positioned himself at the back, watching Caroline's face for signs of insincerity. He found none. "Inside this box," she continued, lifting the wooden container, "are every violation notice I've issued over the past 5 years. Some deserved, many." She paused, meeting Thomas's gaze across the crowd. Many were not. With ceremonial gravity, she opened the box and removed a stack of papers. "Today, I'm voiding them all. We're starting fresh with a new architectural committee structure that ensures fairness and community input." She struck a match and, to the astonished gasps of her neighbors, set the papers aflame in a small fire pit prepared for the occasion. As the ashes of her meticulous violation records floated skyward, Caroline smiled, the first genuine smile Thomas had ever seen from her. Now she announced as the last paper curled into ash, "I believe we were promised a pool party." To everyone's surprise, she led the procession not to the community pool, but directly to Thomas' backyard. At his gate, she paused, waiting for his permission to enter. Thomas hesitated only briefly before nodding his approval. "Thomas Bennett," Caroline addressed him formally, "designed the water systems that keep our gardens green and our homes functioning. What some of you may not know is that he did this work pro bono, saving our HOA thousands." She turned to face the gathered community. "The same expertise he used too." She cleared her throat. "Educate me this week about the consequences of overstepping boundaries." A knowing chuckle rippled through the crowd. "I've spent years keeping people out," Caroline continued. "Today, I'm inviting everyone in." Thomas has graciously agreed to host our first monthly neighborhood pool gathering, a new Westlake Gardens tradition. As neighbors filtered into his backyard, filling his previously private sanctuary with laughter and conversation, Thomas approached Caroline. "Quite a transformation," he observed quietly. "Necessity is a powerful teacher," she replied, "though I suspect your methods would be frowned upon by most educational institutions." Thomas suppressed a smile. "Sometimes the most effective lessons aren't found in textbooks." Caroline nodded toward a family setting up chairs near the pool. The paddles returned from their temporary relocation, children already changing into swim clothes. "I've approved their treehouse plans. Construction begins next week. Redemption looks good on you, Caroline." She straightened, a flash of her former steel showing through. "Don't mistake adaptation for surrender, Thomas. I still believe in standards and order, just with more democracy and less dictatorship." "Fair enough." As the afternoon progressed, Thomas observed the neighborhood interacting with new ease, property lines and social boundaries temporarily dissolved by chlorinated water and shared food. Even Caroline eventually changed into a modest swimsuit and dangled her feet in the shallow end, engaged in animated conversation with Mrs. Rodriguez about xeriscaping techniques. Later, as sunset painted the water in amber hues, Walter Mendez raised a toast to Thomas and Caroline, who showed us that even the worst water pressure problems can be resolved with proper communication.